These kids are happy they get 2 days off on the weekend in high school.
你知道我的3年怎么过的吗？哇！3年的单休，天发了！哇！
Yeah, that's it. Teens in China being so happy that they get 2 days off on the weekend. Well, I would be happy too if this is how they teach kids in China. Now, in China, there's something called a morning reading session, and the point is you read out loud so it helps you to remember the concepts or whatever you're learning. But sometimes it goes really extreme. Is this education or a rap practice? Do you also really need to recite during lunch as well? This honestly makes the New York Stock Exchange trading floor look like a library. The school in that first video then sent out a notice to parents saying that you guys have to gaslight your kids at home to force them to come back on Saturday because, we don't want some kids to feel like they get the freedom while others are forced by their parents. All of you have to do this gaslighting on your kids. Now, in China, if I had to stay there, I would have to go to essentially very far for middle school and even high school because I was from a town where they didn't have a middle or high school. So what that means, I would start to live in a dorm at the school starting in grade 6. And so you can imagine if you're constantly at school, you're essentially doing morning self sessions or late night studying sessions. And then on Saturday and Sunday, they might force you to do these voluntary study sessions. You probably be wound up feeling quite depressed, isolated, and you just want to escape to home. And this is not a movie scene. This is a student revolution. Kids throwing paper into the schoolyard to protest the school's so-called voluntary study sessions on Saturday. An indirect 6 days a week forcing kids to be at school at all times. They tossed paper into the yard as an act of defiance. This all happened at the #1 high school in Ruzhou, which is in the province of Henan. Why? Well, this picture might be able to explain it. The comment here is from a student who explains that this school where the paper protest happened are cream of the crop students from that area. They all want to study well and do really well in school. But they also want to be able to enjoy their legal and well-deserved weekends. So that school held emergency meetings with parents, and then witnesses recount that subsequently kids and their parents had arguments and fights in the hallway, pinpointing the blames away from the school. That's exactly what the administrators at that school want. They want to shift the blames back to the students, saying they're the disruptors. They're the ones who are defiant. from wanting a better education, which obviously in their view means more times at school. But eventually the students did win. The school issued a announcement saying that they will get a 2-day weekend. And just a quick reminder, if you enjoyed China Insider's video, consider subscribing if you haven't already. And also check out this crazy tofu drag specialist hat, which you can get at davidzang.net. In a country where a college degree means nothing because everybody and their mom and dad has one, and the oversaturation of the workforce means you simply have to do every little detail perfect, and hopefully you can land a job later on. The government's solution is to work everybody to their bones in hopes that their workforce will be able to continuously provide cheap labor, pretty pointless production because they're expendable. And for kids, the government solution is study until you drop.
为什么没有任何预兆？全国各地高中突然开始实行双休了？因为学生敏感数据是不会大张旗鼓的告诉你的，所以你以为是突然间就开始双休了。
There's recently a wave of students offing, if you know what I mean, one after another because of the mental pressure, because of the extreme amount of work that they have to be put up with, and obviously the isolation, like I mentioned, that they feel away from home. Isn't that itself counterproductive already? Study or education is supposed to be nurturing the brain, not neutering the brain, right? Yet in China, it seems like their way is to force everybody to use time and hours in exchange for some sort of a gain in education. This kind of relates to why China can't innovate, but they can copycat and reproduce really well, because they're training their young kids to do precisely that, to recite what's already being written in the texts rather than going out and exploring and finding new ways. Now, obviously, I'm not talking about the CCP officials' kids who obviously get to go to the best schools and they actually teach you to innovate in those schools. Well, I'm talking about just the regular folks. Sure, Chinese people may be smart, but they're never taught that there's another way to learning. Chinese people are just test machines. They're really good at writing tests and repeating the answers, but they're not really good at creating something out of nothing. Because you know, totally, right? Test scores is how Bill Gates and the Elon Musks are born into this world. The recent offing of students is just one of the many reasons why some schools are actually enacting this 2-day weekends now, which we'll talk about later. But this was never really about education. It's really about total control. In these videos, you see that starting at a young age, elementary students, they're already incorporated into the CCP system. These are what part of their kids club in the CCP called the Young Pioneer, which they get to wear the red scarves. And here they have to raise their fists to show allegiance, to pledge loyalty to the Communist Party when they're 6, 7 years old. And as part of that brainwashing apparatus, so not only are they just taught to be test machines, they also have to be brainwashed into believing what the government, what the party is doing for them in terms of education is the one and only way that things can be achieved. And we know that China has the 996 work culture, right? So consider the 6 a.m. to 11 p.m. study hours as sort of the preparatory course pipeline to feed into the 996 work culture. Many students in China rack up to 100 plus hours a week in just study time. Now, unlike the other extreme East Asian countries like Japan and South Korea, where they, in Japan in 2002, they abolished the 6 days a week for schooling, although some lawmakers in Japan are trying to bring that back. But Korea also has not been doing, they've been basically doing the 5 days like most countries in the world. And so despite them in similarity in terms of the pressure that students feel, they're doing 5 days a week. But the fact that you have kids here celebrating a simple gesture of schools letting them to go home on a Friday afternoon instead of the Saturdays is just, it's the most bizarre thing that I can watch today. Since last year, there's already been many schools in China, kids protesting the 6 days a week, 7 days a week situation. And it's been gaining a lot of traction. This school here had students writing on blackboards that they were tired and want a weekend. Here, another school. This one, early last year, kids screaming, double weekend off. And this one here is in a Hui Muslim school. Students are fed up with only a total of 22 hours in terms of time off in a week. So I assume that's, Sunday. Last year, many schools had smaller protests because students were told to go to school even on national holiday, which is supposed to be a date of time off. And this one here, students walking to the athletic field to protest asking for 2 days off. Now, it recently exploded in China, which is some of the other factors why they're now doing the 2 days off in certain areas. This new movement called the 611.icu, which I previously had talked about, where students in China can use Firewall to come over and fill out in a form where they can describe what school they're at, what grade, how many hours in total they study in a week, and then also talk about some of the situations of what students are going through. For example, are there any students who off themselves because they couldn't handle the pressure, things like that. At the time of recording, there's about 4,000 entries, so 4,000 different schools that students have reported experiencing some level of sort of abuse one way or another. In its second phase, you have about 270 entries of schools who enacted this voluntary study session, which I talked about is just another excuse for them to stay another day at school. Picture this, right? You have a 15-year-old scrawny kid. Every single morning, they wake up at 5, they have to go to class for a 6 a.m. study session, which runs all the way till 9, then they go to school. Maybe around 3 to 4 p.m., they get off school, eat dinner, then it's time for their night study session, which could run anywhere from 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. And there's no time for things like Fortnite or video games in general, I guess, or even sports in some cases. It's just a math workbook and a clock ticking. That's their Monday through Saturday. And then on Sunday, many of them don't go home, right? Because it's just one day off. What they do is they stay in the dorm and they barely get enough rests. So it's this meat grinder type of schedule. Students aren't really students. They're more like cogs on a wheel. It's no wonder you see kids here. This one picture, he's got gray hair and he looks like he's maybe 15, 14. So like I mentioned, because many schools got exposed on the 611.icu forum, they have to, basically give up the Saturday event and force a 2-day weekend for them. And others took the form of giving more time off to students, such as starting the semester later or actually giving them national holidays off as well. There's some comedic ones too, where students arrive at the school gate and then being told to go home because we're starting school another week or we're delaying the first day of the semester. Now, some parents, of course, think that there's a bit of a complaining to do here, frustration that kids get, time off. In this chat group here, for example, parents are complaining that they themselves don't even get, 5 days, 2 days off on the weekend. How come their kids get to stay home and play video games? Seems unfair. Well, I think you're probably shouldn't be worried about the situation with your kids. You should probably talk about why you're being worked to the bones. But I do understand the parents' perspective, right? Because it's super competitive in China. You don't have enough jobs. The only way for you to feel like you did a lot for your kid, especially because many families are one child only, is that you brought them to college and they graduated with a degree, even though it's pretty worthless. Let's be honest, but it's a sense of duty that Chinese parents have, and they feel like the only way for them to maintain that for their kids is if they push them to study harder, and study harder. Now the question becomes, would the schools then force parents to pay extra money now on Saturday for tutoring sessions? Or would the school find new ways to, get more time and extract more energy out of the students? Because like I mentioned, the bigger issue at play is here, you're sending the people into the workforce, into 996 work culture. Part of me feel hopeful for the kids because, they're learning to protest and that they're fighting for their legality, right? But in another part of me, I'm also fearful because once they get into the real world, once they start to learn that 996 is the reality for people, for a white-collar job, will they feel defeated? It's no wonder, the broader idea is that the CCP obviously needs its, expendable resources. But that's also what some young people end up doing. They just lie flat or laying flat because they simply don't want to contribute anymore to society because, they study all day and they're raised by their parents into high school, into college, only to find out that, oh, look, I did all those years of K to 12 for nothing. I'm a nobody. That's what many young people feel like after they graduate today in China. But so far, at least the younger people, they haven't defaulted into the slave mindset that their parents seems to have gone to. All right, thanks so much for watching this episode of China Insider. If you enjoy the content, leave a like, comment below your thoughts on this topic. Happy to discuss, and as well as subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Also, check out our merch at davidzhang.net, and you can support our channel by also offering a donation. Link is in the description below. Thanks so much for watching. Take care. Bye-bye.